The problem with the typical doorway pec stretch is that it tends to be ineffective and part of a cluster of random exercises that are thrown together. So what I want to do in this video is really help you provide purpose behind your pec doorway stretch and really ask yourself, what is the intention that I'm striving for when it comes to stretching the pec? So there's three main things that we really need to understand to optimize our pec in more of a purposeful way. Number one, we need to respect our assessment. Number two, we need to purposefully exhale. And number three, we need to purposefully inhale. So with that being said, let's jump into the first one so we can learn how to truly optimize our pec and our doorway stretch. So when I say respect your assessment, what I mean by that is that your assessment should be your guide to the proper programming and the proper plan of care for your patient. Unfortunately, a lot of times in the physical therapy world, the assessment's done, we find specific measurements, impairments, and limitations, but then when we go to our programming, we default to our typical shoulder pain patients, and then we do the same exercises for that given condition, or the same exercises for a neck condition, right? When in reality, the specific impairments and limitations that you find during your assessment should be the exact thing that you're looking to fix for your patient. Now, as it relates to our doorway stretch, let's give a brief example of a shoulder pain patient that has right shoulder flexion of 90 degrees and left shoulder flexion of about 160. Right? So a bit of an asymmetry. The right shoulder has a greater limitation compared to the left. Let's assume you did the rest of your assessment and then you're going to your programming. Now, the traditional route, if somebody assigned the patient to do a doorway stretch to try to improve bilateral pec expansion, they do it in a way where they put their arm up into that kind of 160 degree range, and then they tell their patient to stretch, hold it for 30 seconds. Now, wait a second. Is that specific to the patient? Remember, go back to what we just said. The patient had 90 degrees of shoulder flexion. So why are we putting them in 130 degrees of shoulder flexion for the pec stretch? Chances are you're probably going to increase their shoulder impingement, whether they feel it at that point or not. So when we respect our assessment, we stay within our range of motion capabilities. So sure, on the left, go for that 130. Your patient owned that range of motion during the assessment. However, when it comes to the right side, we should be within their capabilities. So 90 degrees or less. The thing is, if your patient doesn't have pain, when they stretch at that 130 degrees of shoulder flexion on the right, they're probably not going to feel their pec. They're probably going to start feeling shoulder dysfunction. They're going to feel scapular tightness. They're going to feel more of their back muscles. Most likely because that's the contributing factor to their shoulder limitations, right? Again, the doorway stretch is more of a symptom reliever, but when it's done in an intentful and purposeful way, it can become pretty powerful. So the first thing you need to really understand is respect your assessment. If your patient doesn't own their full range of motion at the shoulder, then don't move into your exercise and put them in a position that's going to be vulnerable for that shoulder. So the second and third way that we can optimize our doorway stretch is through respiration. Specifically, getting really purposeful with our inhalation and exhalation. Now, breathing is definitely something that is typically cued and coached when we're stretching, but we're going to get a little more intentional with it so we can drive better results for our patients. Now, let's assume we're in a left pec doorway stretch at around that 130 degrees of shoulder flexion. So while we're here, this is where we can then start to coach them how to breathe. So if we think about breathing, we first need to understand normal respiration biomechanics. And with respiration, we have periods of compression and expansion, right? The other thing we need to understand is that air is always moving from concentrations of high to low, or it's going to find the path of least resistance. So in this example, when our left arm is up, we are in an expanded position on the left, right? That pec is going to be more in an elongated, eccentric orientation. The right side of the body is going to be more compressed. So based off our position, we are biased towards driving more air to that left side. And once you understand that, we can get a little bit more strategic with it. So as we go to coach our patient to exhale, right? We are going to tell them to keep their arm in their left position, to take a nice exhale. The exhale needs to get the rib cage, the sternum, everything to go down, right? We need the pump handle to go down, we need the bucket handle to come in. If they do that correct, they will feel an increase in their stretch, but also the increase in the ability to move, right? So we're going to cue the movement with exhalation. So we are going to turn away from the pec side that we're stretching. So in this example of the left, we're going to exhale and turn away. Why can we turn? Well, we can turn because the rib cage is dropping down and in. But here's the thing, if they don't take a good exhale, nothing happens. Meaning, if the rib cage doesn't go down and back, they're not going to be able to move into it. So this is also how you can start driving good overall respiration mechanics. So we exhale. The exhale should allow them to move into their pec stretch more. Okay, so the sternum is moving to the right. The arm is staying put. We are moving the origin and insertion further from each other, right? So that's the first thing that we want to do. We want to exhale and move into it. Now, how do we strategically start to address our inhalation? Well, we are creating more compression on that right side every time that we move in. So we're creating more of a gradient and a barrier on that right side to drive more air to the left. Here's the cool thing. This is where you start to stretch the pec in two ways. The first way is through your origin and insertion pulling. Now, with a proper inhalation, you coach your patient to take that inhale. When they inhale, they're going to expand that pump handle. What's right above that pump handle on our chest is our pec, right? That is going to go through more of an anterior to posterior expansion. It's going to create a bit of space, right? So, how do we know if our patient took a good breath? You should see the left chest wall increase A to P, and they should feel more of a stretch. Why? That A to P is almost extending them, right? And because they move further, they're going to drive, again, more of that origin and insertion further from each other. But the nice thing is they're creating more space. And then what happens? We then are back to our exhale. But at this point, we have a little bit more space. So now that we have more space, we can then move further on the exhale. So you see how you're starting at 2 out of 10 on your number scale, and after every exhale, inhale, hopefully your sternum is significantly further and we're more towards like an 8 out of 10, if you think of it as 10 being the biggest stretch possible. So this is how you get really strategic with your breath. Exhale, you move. Inhale, you need to increase that space and see that proper breathing mechanics. So if you can start to respect your assessment, if you can get purposeful with your inhale, if you can get purposeful and intentional with your exhale, you can really do a lot of good things with a doorway pec stretch. Like we talked about in the beginning, a lot of times these things get neglected. We don't respect the assessment. We put both arms at the same starting point when in fact we don't have our patient doesn't own that motion. And then we just tell them, hey, just breathe 30 seconds. I'll be back in a little bit and we will move on for the next one, right? So instead, we're understanding the left arm needs to be at 130 because they own that motion. The right arm probably needs to be around 90 because they own that motion. From there, exhale 4 breaths. Every exhale, I need to see your sternum moving the opposite way of the pec you're stretching. Inhale, maintain that position. Don't let yourself get pulled back. It's going to try because air is pulling you in that direction. That's going to create space, and then we repeat that. Your patients will start to feel their pec stretch like they've never felt before when you coach it like this.